Welcome to the Tech Collective News Brief, where Scott and I talk about one piece of tech news, why it's important to the industry, and why you should care. How's it going, Scott?
It's going pretty well. How's it going with you?
It's going well. You ready to jump into today's topic?
I am. So today's topic and this fine shirt that I'm wearing have something to do with each other. The topic is that Apple's turning 50. And actually, we're recording on the day that Apple turns 50, um, which I suppose it's not really news. It's a little bit more nostalgia, but there are some implications in the world of tech. So I thought it'd be interesting to jump in and talk about this. This comes from a story that my buddy Harry McCracken wrote over for Fast Company. And Harry and I worked together way back, like literally 30 years ago. We were in the same office back when he was at PC World. And I love Harry's stuff because he has such a great way of framing important people and topics in the world of tech. And so in this article, he actually goes in and gets an oral history from the people who were there. So, like, literally the surviving founders of Apple and the investor and the PR person, the design person, and he's talking to the actual people along the way. So, I guess, firstly, and most important, Dippin, have you seen the movie Jobs? Did you
I
see the
have.
Ashton Kutcher
I
movie?
have. I'm a big Apple fan, right? I have an iPhone, an Apple Watch, MacBooks, AirPods, right? I'm huge into the ecosystem here, and something that I did back when I was in college. I mean, that's if we talk about oral history here, that's when I got into Apple and Apple products. So I'm a fan, and watched all the movies. There's a couple of movies out about Steve Jobs, but I'd love to hear what you think.
I think it's interesting because, well, first, it's like to see from humble beginnings, the garage thing. I think in the article, one of the guys said, like, yeah, we worked more in his sister's room than we did in the garage. So it's kind of a fantasy that's like a garage operation or a garage band kind of situation. Um, I think it's interesting because they did start off humbly, and Steve Wozniak uh, was messing around with computers. It's interesting to see how Woz and Jobs came together and like what they brought, and then what else was needed for them to get started. And it's also fun because I go to the Consumer Electronics Show every year, and I've been, I don't know, 29 or 30 times at this point. And this covers the history. And back in the day, Apple actually used to go to the Consumer Electronics Show. And so when I go every year, I go to Eureka Park, that's like down in the basement of the Venetian, and I'm looking at these companies. And I'm thinking, what could be the next company that just lights it up, that just takes off? And it's one of the reasons why I go to CES every year is to just soak myself in that innovation, that spirit of maybe will be the next big thing. And I'm not an Apple fanboy, and I'm also not an Apple hater. It's like you can't deny what they've done, but it's like, Fleetwood Mac or the Grateful Dead, like I don't particularly love their stuff, but I respect their stuff and I respect their staying power. And it's amazing the effect that they've had in the music industry. And I would say Apple has had a much larger effect on pop culture in general.
I would agree there completely. I mean, the iPhone completely changed the way we think about phones. It's probably the biggest innovation. What they did on the iTunes side and what the iPod. Everyone had an iPod, and some people watching this might not have even heard of an iPod, but that was the thing to have when at the time when it came out, and they just ate up everybody's lunch. Whoever tried to compete, because they were so consumer focused about that experience and staying in the details that it made massive amounts of difference. And I'm with you on I didn't generally love Apple products, but I fall into the camp where, after Steve Jobs was no longer with the company and then sadly passed away, it hasn't been the same company. I mean, I understand Tim Cook's doing a great job for my stock and my Apple portfolio, 100% absolutely love that. But when it comes to innovation, it feels very stalled and stagnant in a lot of ways. Like it's not really revolutionizing the industry the way it used to do. But then again, I guess that's how you get to be a 50-year-old company. At some point, you focus on slowing things down, focused on what's old reliable so you can sell billions and billions of products than you do on the innovation standpoint, right? One of the interesting things in the article that I found was when he was talking about the sort of that startup environment and the way they were innovating and trying to push boundaries, you kind of saw how they were very excited. And then later on, that excitement fled into the entire company. And if people don't know, Steve Jobs also created Pixar when he left Apple for a little while, or I should say was forced out, left Apple, created Pixar, and then came back. And we see what a massive company Pixar is and making some of the most amazing types of movies that stay with most people. So you really at the heart of it is the founders. I think really what Steve Jobs did was amazing. He was definitely to me a once in a generation type of person. And no matter what he was doing at whatever company, he was always pushing things and making things that we would never even think about. And a lot of the future that everyone dreamed about, he brought it into reality.
Yeah, and I think people do forget Steve Jobs worked at Atari. I think he created, was it Breakout? It was like one of their big games at the time. Um, but the fact that he worked at Atari and the fact that he helped start Pixar, which is this huge producer of really great movies now, he's affected gaming, he's affected movies, and he's affected pop culture. He's affected me to want to wear this, mock turtleneck now. Um, it really is a lifestyle thing. What this reminded me of was there's an MKBHD video, it feels like a couple of months ago, where he was talking about like what do brands need to do to go from being, the if you know brand to everybody knows about them. And then, when you're first starting out, you have the enthusiasts. And not for nothing, like this is where I think we're at. We're just starting out. And so the people who are watching us are going to be friends and family and enthusiasts and people who really are into tech and want to be in the know. But as we grow, as we go from 5,000 up to 10,000 and beyond subscribers, then we might have to change our strategy and we might have to address a different segment of the audience that's going to be less and less composed of just um, the people who are early adopters and enthusiasts. And I think that's part of what Apple's had to do, where they have to appeal to millions of people, you know, like if they flop and only sell millions of devices in a particular category, that's a flop for them. Whereas, a startup company would love to sell millions of devices. So
Oh yeah.
it's just such a different scale of economy. Um, and yet, even now, every time I pitch something and somebody wants to say that they're proud of their own design, what do they say? This is the Apple of handheld calculators. This is the Apple of pens. This is the Apple of toasters. I don't know if we need the Apple of any of those things, but that they're still held as the gold standard of like what good design should be.
What's your favorite Apple product?
Oh gosh, I mean, I just said that I'm not like an Apple person. Favorite Apple product. Um, it's funny that the first one that came to mind was the iPad because I was very wrong. Back when they were first coming out and people didn't understand that it wasn't a tip calculator or an ebook reader, they didn't really understand what it did. And now it bridges the gap between phones and computers. And in some ways, they can act like each of those. So I would say that's probably the one that I think of when I think of like the most where the most innovation has come and where it's really affected the way people do things on a daily basis. And I was from an early standpoint, I just was like, oh, this isn't going to work. Like it's not a computer, it's not a phone. Like what is it? Where it's gone in the other direction. How about you? Do you have anything like if you could get right now, unlimited budget, if you could get any piece of Apple kit, what would it be?
I really love their MacBook Pros. I started getting their laptops back in college, like I mentioned, and being in that ecosystem and that sphere, there was some, hiccups along the way. Many things had to catch up, but the way it's so intuitive to me, and the way they think about customers, and the way you can utilize it and use that platform for multi-use, I absolutely love it. So I really, really love the MacBook Pro computers. I don't think I'll ever use anything else. In fact, I'm probably desperately due for a new one, and I'm only looking at, wait, which MacBook Pro do I need, and what specs make the most amount of sense, and what works for my budget. I'm not even considering a PC. And I openly admit that when I've worked at different companies and they say, what type of computer do you want? I always ask for a Mac. And if they gave me a PC, I would just put it to the side and said, nope, I need my Mac, because that's how integrated into their ecosystem I am. And it's because it works. The magic that Apple has is it all works. You have your devices, it's working. You have your iPhone, it works the way you want it to work. Some frustrations here or there. You'll always get those people on the Android side that says, "Oh, but you can't do this," or Apple's very late to a particular piece of technology. I'm like, yeah, but by the time they get it, it works the Apple way, and it's the way I like. I like it, and I like the way it's working. So there's a lot to be said about that Apple benchmark that you were mentioning, and the way they approach technology, and the way they approach their products.
Yeah, I mean, they rarely do things first, and they're more about I think of like Bang& and Olufsen like this. Bang& and Olufsen is very much about the design, and they're not going to be the first speaker, or they're not going to be the first TV or whatever, but they're going to make it's more about an experience. And I think that's part of the whole Jobs philosophy that lives on, which is that these products are about people and about emotions, and people have feelings about what they're doing. It's not just about like, nobody says like, well, technically I need 300 megapixels to blah, blah, blah. They're like, no, I just want to capture moments. I just want to be in the moment, capture stuff. And then they do things like, hey, what if I could take a landscape picture while holding the phone portrait? Like they think about how you're using it and what you want. And that's the Apple way. And so I think that lives on in the mantra of from the early days that was talked about in this article.
This has been a great conversation, Scott. And that's it for the Tech News Brief for today. Thanks again for watching, everyone. If you found this helpful, insightful, or valuable, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you can stay up to date on what's new and important in the world of tech.
And when you comment below, let us know what you think about how has Apple changed? And has your view of Apple changed in the past few years? And then, yeah, what is your favorite Apple product? Like, is there something surprising? We didn't really talk about Apple home automation stuff, the speakers, Apple TV. There's a whole range of stuff that we hadn't covered this time. But 50 years, that's a lot of time to cover. So definitely be active in the comments, and we'll see you next time.